On a dying plantation in war-torn Georgia, a slave is forced by his master to impregnate all 6 of his daughters. The farmhouse shutters stay closed. The girls vanish from Sunday service. And when a root cellar is pried open years later, what's found inside halts the survey team in their tracks. 6 cots, a blood-stained ledger, and a stove filled with tiny bones. The handwriting in the margins doesn't match the master's, and some say the girls wanted it this way. What kind of revenge takes 9 months at a time? If you would like me to continue creating stories so that this history, which is not taught in schools, is not forgotten, please subscribe to this channel. Write in the comments where you are watching from. The winter sun had already dipped behind the pines when Corporal Jonah Grigsby guided his horse through the frozen ruts of the Whitlow Plantation Road. Steam rose from the animal's flanks in the February chill. The fields stretched bare and brown to his right, cotton stalks broken and black against patches of dirty snow. He dismounted at the well, letting his mount drink. That's when the wind shifted, carrying a stomach-turning smell from behind the sugar shed. Sweet rot mixed with something sharper, like wet ashes and burned hair. Jonah wrapped his scarf across his nose and mouth, following the stench. Behind a collapsed lean-to, scattered debris formed a blackened circle. Half-burned logs and charred planks jutted from the mess like broken teeth. His boot struck something that rolled, a bone, bleached white despite the ash. Then another, and another. In the failing light he crouched down, using his bayonet to carefully scrape away layers of wet ash. The skull emerged slowly, small, delicate, with smooth eye sockets and tiny teeth still perfectly aligned. A child's skull, unmistakably human. "Dear God in heaven," he whispered, crossing himself with trembling fingers. Heavy footsteps crunched in the frozen grass behind him. "Corporal, mount up, we're moving out." His commanding officer stood silhouetted against the darkening sky. "Sir, there's something here you need to see. Unless it's Confederate gold or Union scouts, I don't give a damn. We've got 40 men to feed and Bedford Forest breathing down our necks. No time for farmer squabbles." 2 days later, Jonah's letter reached Sheriff Ward's office, the paper wrinkled from hard riding. Human-like skull found among ash and animal rot at Whitlow Plantation. Situation requires immediate attention. Sheriff Ward and Deputy Ellis arrived that Sunday, their horses' hooves breaking through patches of ice on the muddy road. Ambrose Whitlow met them at the front steps, a tall figure in a black broadcloth coat that hung loose on his frame. "Gentlemen," his voice was dry as dead leaves. "What brings the law to my door?" Ward dismounted, boots squelching in the mud. "Report of suspicious remains on your property, Mr. Whitlow. We'll need to examine the area behind your sugar shed." "Ah." Whitlow's face remained perfectly still. "The raccoon plague. Had to burn the corpses before they spread disease. Nothing more than vermin control, I assure you." "We'll still need to look," Ellis said, already walking toward the shed. "And the house?" Ward gestured to the silent windows above them. "Your daughters well?" "Indisposed. Illness among the staff has kept them confined to their rooms." Whitlow's hands tightened on his walking stick. "I cannot permit entry today. Health concerns, you understand?" The search yielded little. Rain and melting snow had turned the ash pile to grey soup. Ellis found bone fragments, but nothing conclusively human. That evening, Ward penned a note to Dr. Turness, sealing it with wax before dispatching a runner. "Require your professional insight regarding the Whitlow girls' last examination. Matter of some urgency." In his study, Dr. Turness lifted his worn leather ledger from the highest shelf, brushing off years of dust. The pages crackled as he turned to the final entry on Maybelle Whitlow, dated 1859. His hands trembled slightly as he read his own faded script. Patient presents with irregular bleeding, severe malnourishment. Signs of... The coal oil lamp sputtered as Dr. Turnus settled into his leather chair, the worn patient ledger heavy in his lap. Outside his study window, winter rain pelted the glass in steady sheets. His fingers, spotted with age, traced down the yellowed pages until he found the entries from 1859. Whitlow, Maybelle, age 16, he read aloud, squinting through his wire spectacles. Severe anemia, possible rickets. Patient refuses to make eye contact during examination. He turned the page. Whitlow, Sarah, age 14, premature menarche, accompanied by unexplained bruising on arms and neck. The entries continued, documenting all 6 sisters. Each notation grew more troubling than the last. Clara, age 12, malnourished, showing signs of confinement. Ruth, age 10, notable regression in speech, flinches at touch. Martha, age 8, unusually quiet, dark circles beneath eyes suggest sleep deprivation. And finally, Grace, barely 6. Isolation stress evident in behavior. Dr. Turnus reached for his inkwell and a fresh sheet of paper. His hand trembled slightly as he began his affidavit. I, Dr. Melvin Turnus, being of sound mind and professional standing, do hereby attest to the following observations regarding the Whitlow sisters, last examined in the year 1859. He wrote until the lamp ran low, detailing every symptom, every worried glance, every unanswered question. On Tuesday morning, he sealed the document and personally delivered it to the sheriff's office. The storms that followed turned Harris County's red clay roads into impassable rivers. Sheriff Ward didn't reach the Whitlow plantation until Thursday afternoon, his horse struggling through knee-deep mud. The property stood silent, except for one field hand working distant rows. Ambrose Whitlow answered his knock, wearing the same black coat, somehow more ill-fitting than before. His hollow cheeks seemed to sink deeper in the grey light. My daughters are in Macon, he stated before Ward could ask, visiting their mother's cousin. Took ill some weeks ago. And Elijah? Ward pressed. Your house servant. Ran off with Union raiders. Whitlow's face remained perfectly still. Good riddance to him. I'll need documentation of their travel arrangements, Ward said. Mail receipts, driver logs, in such times. Whitlow's laugh held no warmth. War makes record-keeping rather impossible, wouldn't you say, Sheriff? Without witnesses or remains, the investigation stalled. Back in his office, Ward wrote, Case status, inconclusive, no physical evidence of wrongdoing, across the file cover. But Deputy Ellis lingered after hours, hunched over his personal logbook. By lamplight, his careful hand sketched the skull he'd seen in the ash pile, its delicate shape, the tiny teeth, the curved dome, no larger than a child's fist. Beneath the drawing, he underlined a single word, infantile. Later that night, Ellis rode back alone to the ravine behind the sugar shed. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the ground soft and dark. He worked methodically through the wet ashes until metal clicked against his shovel. A rusted hairpin, simple but elegant, with the letter M scratched into its surface. He slipped it into his vest pocket, where it lay cold against his heart. The August heat pressed down like a wet blanket as Samuel North tied his horse to a fallen fence post. The Whitlow plantation, once the crown jewel of Harris County cotton production, had surrendered to nature's slow reclamation. Thick sedge grass swallowed the fallow fields, while kudzu vines crept up the mansion's weathered columns. North wiped sweat from his brow, consulting his survey map. As a Freedmen's Bureau inspector, he'd seen dozens of abandoned properties, but something about this one made his skin prickle. The air hung thick with mold and decay, undisturbed by even the slightest breeze. He circled the main house, measuring distances and marking boundaries. Behind the kitchen wing, his boot caught on something solid beneath a tangle of morning glory vines. Kneeling, North brushed away layers of dead leaves to reveal a heavy wooden door set into the ground, a root cellar, its hinges wrapped in rusted chains and secured with thick iron nails. It took him nearly an hour to pry it open. The stairs descended into darkness, each step groaning under his weight. The beam of his lantern revealed a space far larger than any root cellar he'd encountered, roughly 20 feet square with a packed dirt floor. But instead of shelves for preserves or bins for vegetables, North found himself standing in what appeared to be a crude dormitory. 6 separate spaces had been sectioned off with rough-hewn timber posts and rotting fabric curtains. Each contained a narrow cot, some with straw mattresses still intact, and a ceramic chamber pot. "Dear God in heaven," North whispered, his voice echoing in the dank space. He moved from partition to partition, the lantern light revealing more horrors with each step. Carved into the wooden walls were cryptic tallies. E74 in one space, E118 in another, E142 in a third. The marks continued, each section bearing its own mysterious record. In the corner stood a cast-iron stove, its door hanging loose on one hinge. North's lantern illuminated something white among the ashes inside. He reached in carefully and withdrew what could only be human bones. Tiny skulls and curved pelvic fragments, no larger than his palm. With trembling hands, North penned 2 urgent messages. The first went to Sheriff Ward, the second to Dr. Turness. Both men arrived within hours, the doctor's face growing ashen as he examined the remains. "These are fetal bones," Turness confirmed, handling each fragment with gentle reverence. "Underdeveloped crania and pelvises, stillborn most likely, though at various stages of development." Sheriff Ward moved methodically through each partitioned space, noting signs of recent habitation. A half-burned candle, a comb with dark hair still tangled in its teeth, a tin cup with water stains not yet fully dried. As North searched the walls for additional clues, his fingers found a loose wooden panel near the floor. Behind it lay a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. Inside were 6 locks of braided hair, each tied with thread, and a rusted knife carefully wrapped in oil paper. Pinned to the bundle was a scrap of yellowed paper. The writing was precise but faint. E.T. All daughters baptized. Mule Ridge Baptist. The 3 men stared at the evidence in silence, the lantern flames casting long shadows on the cellar walls. The late summer rain had warped the sacristy cabinet, making Reverend Birch struggle with the brass key. Inside, leather-bound volumes lined the shelves, birth records, marriage certificates, and baptismal registers dating back to 1840. Deputy Ellis stood nearby, his notebook open, waiting. "These records are sacred," Birch said, pulling out the 1862 ledger. "We document God's children, legitimate or not." The pages were yellowed but clean, each entry made in careful script. He laid the heavy book on a reading stand near the window, where morning light filtered through clouded glass. Ellis leaned forward. "We're looking for any mention of E.T. or Elijah Thomas." Birch's fingers traced down columns of names and dates until he stopped abruptly at a series of entries from March 1862. His face paled. "Here," he said, tapping the page. 6 baptisms recorded on consecutive Sundays, all Whitlow girls. Ellis moved closer, squinting at the cramped writing. Under each daughter's name, Maybelle, Edna, Ruth, Lila, Sarah, and Clara, the same phrase appeared. "Illegitimate issue of Elijah Thomas." "The handwriting," Birch noted. "It's different from my own. See how it trembles?" Someone took great pains to make these entries appear official, but they're forged. Ellis copied each entry carefully into his notebook. Who had access to these records? The cabinet was always locked, Birch replied. But during services, he trailed off, remembering. The Whitlow girls stopped attending in 55, except there was one Sunday in 62. Maybelle came alone, asked to pray. She stayed after everyone left. Dr. Turnus arrived within the hour, examining the register entries through his wire-rimmed spectacles. His new affidavit was clinical, but damning. The systematic recording of these births under Thomas's name, combined with previous observations of the girl's physical state, suggests ongoing sexual contact under coercive context. By noon, Deputy Ellis had drafted a notice for the Columbus Ledger, wanted for questioning. Elijah Thomas, formerly enslaved, age 26, literate, last seen Harris County, regarding matters of record at Mule Ridge Baptist Contact Sheriff Ward with information. The notice was posted Saturday. Sunday morning, as congregation members filed into church, a field hand named Moses Tucker approached the sheriff's office. He'd been working temporary jobs since emancipation, including recent days at Widow Bales's property 14 miles south. Man there calling himself Eli, Tucker reported. Tall, quiet-spoken, does fine work with a plow. But he ain't Eli nothing. That's Elijah Thomas from Whitlow's place. Known him since we was boys. Sheriff Ward unrolled a map across his desk, marking the Bales widow's property with a red X. He dispatched riders to gather a posse, then retrieved a writ of detention from Judge Clemens' office. The document authorized them to question Thomas regarding falsified church records and related matters of grave concern. As Sunday's last light faded, Ward assembled 12 armed men in the town square. They would ride at first light, approaching the Bales property from different directions to prevent any escape into the pine thickets beyond. The cotton field stretched empty under the August sun, stalks already stripped and stubble browning in the heat. Elijah Thomas worked methodically between the rows, his hoe rising and falling in steady rhythm. The borrowed hat slipped down his forehead with each stroke, too large for his lean frame. Sheriff Ward and Deputy Ellis approached from opposite directions, boots crunching on dried leaves. 6 other men circled wider, rifles ready. But Elijah showed no sign of surprise or resistance when Ward called out his name. He simply planted the hoe blade in the dirt and turned to face them. "I've been expecting you," he said quietly, removing the oversized hat. Since they found the cellar. The ride back to Harris County took 3 hours. Elijah sat straight in the saddle, hands bound, but dignified, speaking only when spoken to. At the jailhouse, he asked first for water, then for writing materials. "I'll tell it true," he said to Deputy Ellis, who provided paper, ink, and a sturdy pen. "Every birth, every death. But I need Judge Clemens here to witness." The judge arrived as evening shadows lengthened. In the small office adjacent to the cells, Elijah began writing in a careful hand, each letter precisely formed. Ellis watched the pages fill, noting how the prisoner never hesitated or scratched out words. "Ambrose Whitlow first came to me in the spring of 1855, the confession began. I was 17. He said God had chosen me for a purpose. When I refused, he showed me the knife he'd use. First on the girls, then on me. Said he'd blamed their deaths on the unruly slave who attacked them." The account continued in meticulous detail. Dates, times, locations, all matching the mysterious marks found scratched in the cellar. Maybelle first, then each sister in turn as they reached maturity. Forced coupling under threat of death, pregnancies hidden from visitors, births in secret. But something changed, Elijah wrote. The girls started coming to me willingly. They saw what their father truly was. Maybelle said their blood must not continue through him. They made me promise to help end it. Judge Clemens read each page as it was completed, his face growing grimmer. Deputy Ellis transcribed key details into his notebook. 6 girls, 11 pregnancies, 8 deaths documented. By midnight, lanterns bobbed like fireflies behind the sugar shed as men searched the ravine. The first skeleton emerged from beneath rotted leaves, adult-sized, wrapped carefully in faded linen. Then another, smaller. 3 tiny skulls followed, each bundled separately. Ellis worked methodically, sketching the position of each find. Near the largest remains, his lantern light caught something metallic. Brushing aside loose earth, he uncovered a simple ring, its surface carved with 2 letters, E+M. He held it up to the light, studying the crude but deliberate markings. The initials could only mean one thing: Elijah and Maybelle. Not just a victim and her tormentor, but something more complicated. A bond forged in darkness, sealed with a secret vow. The courtroom fell silent as Deputy Ellis placed the silver ring on Judge Clemens's bench. Morning light from the tall windows caught its crude engravings. E+M, shallow but unmistakable in the metal's surface. The deputy had wrapped it carefully in cotton cloth after finding it near the ravine bodies. "Can you identify this item?" Judge Clemens asked, his voice carrying through the hushed chamber. Elijah Thomas stood straight in his prisoner's clothes, hands folded before him. "Yes, sir. I made it for Maybelle Whitlow, from a broken spoon handle." "When?" "After her second child died, 1862. Elijah's voice remained steady. "She asked me to make it, said we needed something to remember." The next morning brought Miss Louetta Jameson's testimony. Too frail to attend, the elderly midwife had given her account via sworn affidavit, read aloud by the court clerk. "I was called to the Whitlow plantation late one night in November 1861. Found the eldest girl, Maybelle, already in hard labor. Young, too young. The baby came blue and still. But what stays with me was her eyes when it was over. Not shamed there, but a fury burning cold as winter. She grabbed my arm and whispered, 'Tell them when the time comes. Tell them the father wasn't Master Whitlow.' I took payment to keep quiet then. May the Lord forgive me." Dr. Turness took the stand next, medical records spread before him. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his spectacles. "I examined Maybelle Whitlow's remains specifically," he testified. "The pelvic bones show clear evidence of childbirth, likely multiple instances. Given her estimated age at death, the first delivery would have occurred when she was approximately 15 years old." He paused, swallowing hard. "This aligns with both Mr. Thomas's account and Miss Jameson's affidavit." The evidence mounted through the morning. Deputy Ellis presented the torn journal pages found in the cellar, their edges ragged but the writing clear. Dates, initials, crude tallies. Each entry corresponded to markings in Ambrose's plantation ledger. Births, deaths, calculated with merchant's precision. By afternoon, Ellis had returned to the Whitlow house for a final search. The master bedroom stood untouched since Ambrose's arrest, dust settling on the heavy furniture. In the corner stood a brass-handled chest, its lock already broken from previous investigations. Inside, beneath folded linens, Ellis found a butcher's apron, stiff with old stains. Beside it lay a pair of leather gloves, equally marked. The deputy catalogued each item carefully in his notebook, noting the distinctive rust-colored patterns. As he lifted the gloves, something fluttered to the floor. Pages torn from a ledger book, the edges precisely cut. Ellis recognized the same neat columns and handwriting from Ambrose's business records, but these entries were different. These were the missing middle pages, removed with deliberate care. The Pine Hollow meeting hall creaked under the weight of curiosity. Farmers and merchants filled the rough-hewn benches, their Sunday clothes dusted with late summer heat. Copies of the Columbus Ledger rustled in nervous hands, headlines screaming about the Whitlow horror in bold type. Judge Horace Clemens adjusted his spectacles, the morning light catching silver at his temples. Before him lay Elijah Thomas's confession, 12 pages of careful script on yellowed paper. The judge's throat worked as he began to read. I was 17 when Master Whitlow first called me to the house at night. The statement began. He said God had chosen me for a purpose, that his bloodline needed strengthening. Ambrose Whitlow sat motionless in iron shackles, his ash-colored face betraying nothing. The bailiff stood close, one hand on his pistol. As the judge continued reading, several women left the hall, handkerchiefs pressed to their mouths. The confession detailed 6 years of systematic abuse. Dates aligned perfectly with the scratched markings found in the root cellar. E74 marked Maybelle's first pregnancy. E11-8 recorded Ruth's stillborn daughter. Each birth, death, and burial had been documented with terrible precision. Circuit Clerk Thomas Hadley presented birth records from Harris County, 1861 through 1864. Notice these gaps, he said, indicating blank spaces in the leather-bound volume. All Whitlow births were recorded, then deliberately removed. Only the baptism entries at Mule Ridge remain, showing Elijah Thomas as father. James Cooper, a carpenter who'd done repair work at the plantation, testified next. Elijah had the only key to that cellar door, he stated, wiping sweat from his collar. But it was Master Whitlow who commissioned the locks, paid cash, insisted on extra bolts, said it was for storing valuables. The daughter's journal pages came last. Judge Clemens selected passages carefully, his voice growing hoarse. Father thinks he punishes us through Elijah. But we chose him. His seed will erase Father's tainted blood. Our children died pure. Another entry, dated 1863. We carry his shame in our wombs, but he will carry the blame. The ledger tells all truths. And finally, in shaking script, let them find our bones. Let them know what fathers do to daughters. Elijah understands. He will survive to tell. Throughout the reading, Ambrose Whitlow remained eerily still. Only his eyes moved, tracking something invisible across the floorboards. When asked if he wished to speak, he simply shook his head. As sunset painted the hall windows crimson, Judge Clemens closed the journal. This court will reconvene Friday morning at 9 o'clock for sentencing, he announced. The accused will remain in county custody until then. The gathered crowd filed out slowly, no one speaking above whispers. Deputy Ellis led Whitlow back to his cell in irons, past townspeople who turned their faces away. But Friday's judgment would never come. When the jailer brought breakfast at dawn on Thursday, he found Ambrose Whitlow hanging from a ceiling beam, his neck stretched by a rope fashioned from his own bed linens. Pinned to his shirt was a scrap of paper bearing Psalm 94:23. He shall bring upon them their own iniquity, and shall cut them off in their own wickedness. The handwriting was unmistakably Elijah's, August 24th, dawned grey and thick with fog. Deputy Corbin Ellis's boots echoed on the jailhouse's wooden floor as he approached Whitlow's cell for the morning check. The corridor smelled of wet stone and iron, familiar scents now tainted by something heavier. "Breakfast, Mr. Whitlow," Ellis called out, his voice bouncing off the bare walls. No response came from the shadowed cell. The deputy's lantern light caught the edge of Whitlow's boot first, swaying slightly 6 inches above the floor. The rest of him emerged from the gloom as Ellis raised the light, head tilted at an unnatural angle, hands limp at his sides, bedsheet twisted tight around his throat. The other end was secured to a ceiling beam, the knot methodical and precise. "Dear Lord," Ellis whispered, fumbling with his keys. He shouted for the night guard, who came running. As they cut down the body, Ellis noticed the paper pinned to Whitlow's shirt with what looked like a nail from the bed frame. The message was written in a steady hand. Psalm 9:17, "The wicked shall be turned into hell." Dr. Turnus arrived within the hour, examining the corpse with clinical detachment. "Death by strangulation," he concluded, measuring the ligature marks. "Between midnight and 3 a.m., judging by the body's condition." Sheriff Ward studied the suicide note, comparing it to Elijah's confession from the previous week. "The slant matches," he observed. "See how the H loops back? Same hand that wrote the testimony. But the cell doors had remained locked all night. The guards swore no one had entered or left. Elijah Thomas was still secure in his own cell 3 doors down, sleeping soundly when they checked. By noon, half of Pine Mountain had heard the news. Townspeople gathered outside the jail, their whispers carrying through the barred windows. "That slave played us all for fools," someone said, "pretending submission while plotting murder." "No," argued another. "Whitlow did this himself. The girls haunted him to it." Judge Clemens arrived at 2 o'clock, accompanied by the court clerk. He examined the scene, read the coroner's preliminary findings, and spoke briefly with Elijah, who offered no explanation for the matching handwriting. "This death removes the need for execution," Clemens declared finally. "Mr. Thomas has demonstrated neither violence nor flight risk during his confinement. The court considers justice served." The following Thursday, Elijah Thomas walked out of the Harris County Jail a free man. He carried only what he'd brought in, a small cloth pouch containing 6 braided locks of hair and the carved ring marked E+M. Sheriff Ward offered him a horse and escort to the county line, citing concerns about vigilante justice. Elijah declined with a slight shake of his head. "Which way will you go?" Deputy Ellis asked, watching the former slave adjust his worn hat. "North," was all Elijah said. He started walking without looking back, his shadow stretching long in the morning sun. By nightfall, he had vanished from Harris County forever. 27 years later, in the autumn of 1892, a clerk at the Macon courthouse would receive a curious document, an affidavit signed by a woman claiming to be Ruth Whitlow Thomas, born 1893. But that was still decades away on this August morning, as Elijah Thomas disappeared into the Georgia pines, leaving only whispers and questions behind. October 2nd, 1892, dawned cold and crisp in Harris County. Samuel Blackwood, the courthouse archivist, sorted through yellowed estate papers in the basement records room. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through the ground-level windows. His fingers, stained with ink and age, paused over a familiar name. Whitlow. The leather-bound ledger lay beneath a stack of property deeds. Its spine crackled as he opened it, revealing neat columns of births, deaths, and property transactions. But where the years 1862 to 1864 should have been, 3 clean-cut gaps remained in the binding, pages torn out with surgical precision. "Mr. Blackwood," his assistant called down the stairs, "there's talk of a woman asking after the Whitlow records in Macon last week. Said she was born there in 63. Ruth Whitlow Thomas," Blackwood muttered, remembering the affidavit notice. She never came back to sign the papers properly. Throughout that autumn, whispers spread through the freed communities of Georgia. In Columbus, a shopkeeper claimed his grandmother helped deliver a baby girl to one of the Whitlow daughters. In Augusta, former slaves spoke of Elijah Thomas teaching their children to read before vanishing north. Each story added another thread to the tapestry of speculation. Reverend Marcus Tillman, who rode a circuit between Atlanta and Savannah, testified to baptizing a young woman in 1875. "Grey eyes like winter water," he wrote in his parish diary. She carried herself like educated folk, though she lived simple, called herself Clara Ruth Elijah, taught Negro children in a cabin school. But when pressed, no one could produce papers or letters. The woman disappeared from church records after 1876. Her school, if it existed, left no trace. The Whitlow plantation land changed hands again in 1901. New owners filled the root cellar with river stones, poured concrete over the foundation. They built a cotton gin where the main house once stood. The ravine behind the sugar shed became pasture for cattle. Yet fragments of truth remained, buried in unexpected places. In 1937, historian Margaret Webb discovered Miss Louetta Jameson's midwife logs while researching maternal care among slaves. The elderly midwife's shaky script filled dozens of leather notebooks, recording births both free and enslaved. On page 47, dated November 1863, a single line stood out. "Only one girl begged to keep the child. I told her she would raise the last Whitlow in peace." No name followed. No birth weight or time was recorded. The entry ended there, as if Miss Louetta's pen had faltered under the weight of what she knew. That final Whitlow child, born of violence and vengeance, carried in secret, delivered in shadows, vanished into the vast silence of Reconstruction-era Georgia. The child's name was never recorded.